everyone, coming to you again with another regular movie review, and today I wanted to talk about the film that I just got done watching, and that was Taxi Driver. Yes, Taxi Driver. Probably one of Robert De Niro's sort of bigger, I guess, starting breakout roles. This film was made in 1976. So Robert De Niro is fairly young in this film, and you'll see how his character really does drive this film. And I think it's safe to say that it is probably one of his more well-known works. There's, I think, in particular famous scenes where people like to pull from. And scenes you probably have seen before. The reason why I don't put, I think, Taxi Driver as a classic is because I think there's just certain parts of the film that people really remember, but I don't think really people remember the film as a whole. I don't think they really, or I don't think the film as a whole is, I think, something very I guess maybe memorable or intriguing, I guess. There are parts of this film where I felt like it was a little bit odd at times, and I think it was intended to be odd, only because you're introduced to Robert De Niro's character, and I didn't know really anything about this film until going into it, and then I kind of realized, oh, he's supposed to have like these kinds of problems and issues and stuff. So when I see this sort of happening, it's hard for me to sort of maybe identify maybe with his character, but you do kind of see where his sort of psychological problems come from, in particular due to the fact that he is alone a lot for the majority of this film, in that it's hard for him to identify, I guess, with people, and you'll sort of see this as the movie tries to establish itself in the beginning. But I think in general, just as a whole, I don't think the film holds up to be anything, I think, so spectacular. I think it's just okay for what it is. I don't think it's really trying to do anything new. I think all it's trying to do is to just give you a sort of interesting take on a psychological thriller, and in doing so, helping sort of launch Robert De Niro's career. But basically, in case you don't know what this film is about, it is centered around Robert De Niro's character, who is Travis Bickly. And Travis Bickly is a Marine, or former Marine, who becomes a taxi driver, and that's why the film is called, hence Taxi Driver. And basically, he goes around New York City driving in a taxi. And as he's driving around in a taxi, he kind of observes people. Again, he's rather alone. They really make it seem like he is sort of depressed, in that he's in a new place. He doesn't really know anyone, it seems like. He doesn't really associate a lot with people, and he kind of sees sort of the absurdity that goes on as he's like driving down the streets. And in particular with New York, because he sees a lot of the sort of crime that's going on. And as it goes on, you'll see how his character really wants to do something about this kind of world that he lives in. And this world is fairly cruel, and he wants to sort of shift it. And you'll see how Jodie Foster, who's also in this film, who's fairly young as well, play a child prostitute named Iris, or slash Easy Steensma. And basically her character comes into play when he he sees her coming into his taxi, and she's scared of this one guy, but then this one guy pulls her out, and then he manages to see her on the street again, and he tries to sort of take her in and sort of get her off the street, and you'll kind of see how this plays into the whole climax of the film. But for the majority of this film, it's really focusing a lot on Robert De Niro's psyche. A lot of the famous scenes that come really from this film in particular deal with Robert De Niro's sort of acting, and acting fairly well and giving a good performance with his character. Now, I don't think his character necessarily, Travis Bickle, is the most likable type-ish character. I don't think he's really intended to be. I think he's just supposed to be sort of a sort of broken up character as far as mentality is concerned, because there are scenes in this film where you do get the sense that he is a little bit has something wrong. He's acting unusual, and you'll sort of see this, and you kind of wonder how you're supposed to kind of identify with him. And see, that's the thing. I don't think he's supposed to be identifiable. I think he's just supposed to represent someone in a state that maybe a lot of us have maybe never been in, or maybe some of us have been in, who knows. But in doing so, I think the movie tries to establish this through in particular Travis, and Robert De Niro's acting, I think, serves the character well. There is that famous scene though where he says, like, "Are you talking to me?" And there's nobody around. He's like in his room and he's talking to himself. So, and he just gives off this kind of performance that shows sort of the character's mindset, and how it's fairly through his perspective, and sometimes this film does kind of make you uncomfortable. At times I think it was uncomfortable for me to watch it because it was hard for me to, I think, identify with it at certain points, because again, Robert De Niro's character is just so out there and a little unusual at times that it's hard for me to find something that I kind of understand or can wrap my brain around in understanding. But for the most part, I think this film does a good job of like establishing this kind of atmosphere of New York, and having it be dirty and smelly. Even Robert De Niro's character Travis, he complains in the film of how it's so smelly and it's dirty and it's not nice and clean, and yeah, it's fairly understandable to say that yes, this city in particular is New York, and I've been to New York, and yeah, it is not clean even to this day. Even though this film was made in 1976, it's still not clean. It's not. There's a lot of dirty parts of New York, but it's still a lovely city nonetheless. But he kind of complains about it being dirty. And you'll also see sort of how these politics sort of come into play with this one particular person who wants to be elected to office, and you'll kind of see how Robert De Niro's character sort of comes into play with these kinds of politics, even though he says he's not really a political guy. So that's also, I think, a little makes it a little bit interesting in that respects. In particular, with also the idea of it being the movie take place a little bit after the Vietnam War. And you'll see how they dress really like 70s, late 60s style. Bell bottoms and you know, the glasses, and just everything is 70s, and that's fairly understandable because this was made in 1976. But I think the costumings really work well in that I feel like I'm going back into another world, even though this world technically was the time period and technically was what people were wearing. So that is kind of interesting. But I think I can somewhat identify with Travis's loneliness through the film, and how his life isn't all that exciting, and he has to just go day by day doing the same thing, just going in the taxi, and but as far as all the other traits are concerned, and with the streets and such, you kind of get a sense of that he wants to focus his energy on something, because again, he is a very depressed man. So I think his means can be somewhat understandable, but I don't think necessarily identifiable. I just don't see how he could decide to go to such lengths all of a sudden for a particular cause that he has, in how he wants to sort of push New York away from like things like the prostitution and such. But it's really emphasized through sort of this companionship he develops with Jodie Foster's character, even though they don't really share that many scenes together, because the film does, for the most part, focus in on Robert De Niro. And I think this film, again, yes, it's directed by Martin Scorsese, and I think Martin Scorsese does a good job of giving atmosphere, and I think throughout the most of the film he's kind of trying to give this atmosphere, and he's kind of trying to make it somewhat, I think, unpredictable, in the sense of you don't really know where it's going. If you've never seen this film or heard of this film, or maybe heard of it but just never really knew what it was about, this film, for the most part, that's what I felt when I was coming into it. I didn't really know what it was about, but watching it, I kind of didn't know what was going to happen or where they were going to go with his character. And I think if a film can do that, I think that's fairly effective, especially for maybe a psychological thriller film. If they can somehow build this tension with the character. And I think I do get a sense of, okay, this is kind of what Travis is doing now, but I don't know what's going to happen next, and what's really going to be sort of the end, until you sort of get up to maybe a certain point. Then you can maybe tell, okay, this is maybe what he's going to do. But at times you get a sense a little bit of his motivations, and at times you still feel like he has this kind of mystery to him in how he interacts with other people. So I think that's also something worth noting and worth taking into consideration. But I think for the most part, that's really what this film is trying to say. It's him going through this kind of psychological sort of issue with himself, and in doing so using his energy to try to do something ultimately good. And you'll sort of see that kind of goodness shine, even though he maybe has to do horrible things in order to have some good outcome come out of those things. So really, that's all the film is really trying to say. I don't. For me, I think the film does move at sort of a slow pace at times, but I still kind of have the sense in the back of my mind, okay, what's going to happen. But at the same time, I think sometimes it does kind of disengage me a bit, where I kind of go, okay, kind of get to the point here, what's going on. I like things a little bit more clear, and I think this movie does this thing where it tries to like drag things and then kind of just moves on to the next thing, and I like it when it's a little bit more concise. I like it like that more than trying to sort of take you through this kind of obscure psychological mind that is Robert De Niro's character. But I personally think it works for what it's intended to be, but it just depends if this film sounds, from what I've said, in any way, shape, or form appealing. I think this is a certain type of film that will probably get a lot of people to like it, and for others maybe not necessarily so, because of the certain things that are maybe in it, and the things that are kind of are just shrouded, and things that you don't really know what's going on and what's going to happen with sort of Robert De Niro's character, because his character is, I think, a little bit unpredictable, and I think that's I think good to have in a psychological thriller movie, but it doesn't build this sense of like thriller-esqueness like a lot of the other films do, maybe with like maybe Psycho being an example. It's just intended to kind of give you this sort of atmosphere of New York and a sense of really Robert De Niro's character and how his surroundings sort of impact his character, and what leads him to do these things that ultimately provide in some way, shape, or form of a benefit to society. So you'll kind of see how it all sort of unfolds, and sort of how his mental state maybe changes over the film. So it's fairly psychological in that sense. So if you like these psychological-esque type movies where they focus more on character and the mindset and stuff, then I think this would appeal to you. But if you don't like that kind of a thing, and you are more into characters that are maybe more relatable, you're probably not going to find it here, because Robert De Niro's character, I don't think, is intended to be relatable. I think he's intended to be someone who's just in a state that maybe a lot of people have never really been in, and in doing so, being able to take that state and use it in a way that ultimately benefits society, even though he has to go to extreme lengths in order to do so. So I think that's really all this movie's trying to say, but I think that's really all I can say about it. It's fairly straightforward, but if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But again, I don't really label it as a classic, because for me, I don't really find the film as a whole necessarily so like impacting or interesting, or I don't find it so memorable. I find it a little bit more of, it's just a good psychological thriller. That's what I come out of it thinking. rather than thinking it's a classic. It's in that category. But it does have some memorable scenes. Robert De Niro does an excellent job. The side characters as well do a good job. But he stands out the most because he's in the majority of it. And it really focuses in on him. So, yeah, I think that's really all I can say about Taxi Driver. But again, any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time.